Hello, namaste, good evening, and a very, very warm welcome to all the viewers of India Rising episode number 2. Dear viewers, last time we touched on various topics related to an India that is on the rise. You all must have got a flavor of several sectors where India has either already achieved success or is on the path leading to significant progress. As we all know, India is one of the most populous countries on our planet. One area where India's growth could be explored is indeed human capital. So, in this episode, let us talk about India and India's human capital. And we have once again our exceptionally nice, talented panel of Nivedita Haran. Hello, Nivedita. Namaste.
Hi, Anjalee. Namaste.
Hi, namaste. Narayanan Komerath.
Namaste.
And we have Rajeev Srinivasan. Namaste. So, welcome to our second episode of India Rising, and it's a pleasure to have the three of you once again in our studio. And without further delay, I would like to first start with Narayananji. It so happened that Narayananji sent me a set of wonderful slides related to India, an overview of India status in terms of the human capital. And I was very impressed. So can I please request you, Narayananji, if you could give our viewers a presentation of your slides. I think it will be great if they can get to see what you have created.
So thanks, Anjali. Yeah, that's the first slide that you're seeing there. So remember all those programs that Nivedita mentioned last time. This slide translates the Indian names to English. And please take a look at those. There's Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, cleaning up groundwater, and so on and so forth. The GST, General Sales Tax, the Ayushman Bharat Gramin Sadak Yojana, and I've given my brief explanations there. So since 2016, many more such programs have been coming online, and the effect of those will be visible over the next decade. You can view this at your leisure. So let's see the next slide, because I really want to show the linkages between all of these. That looks like a mess, but look at the center of it. We expect central governments to focus on those basic issues that are shown there: national integrity, constitutional rights and duties, etc., etc. But they have tied technology into social programs to break through several long-time frustrations. Things that we said will never change in India has suddenly changed. First, using the railway microwave network to propagate mobile phones. What an idea. They set up the microwave network because India was too poor to lay copper lines and all these things to every place. And the rail network reaches all over India. So they used microwaves, and then they said, hey, we can use these as cell phone towers. And that's it. What is that? 500 million or a billion cell phone connections came up so fast. Then they used those cell phone connections. 440 million bank accounts operated by mobile phones already. They call them mobile phones in India, as opposed to the landlines, which are so difficult to get before. Next, life insurance for everyone using those bank accounts. A telemedicine system that is amazing. affordable medical care, which I so wish we could have in the United States, and affordable medicines, likewise. Basic sanitation started from there, affordable housing, cooking gas to replace firewood. Day to day, these have made such a huge difference to people, to everyday citizens, and the citizens' sense of belonging in a nation that is truly moving forward. But even more interesting is the sequencing and links between these programs. So, if I can have the next slide, please. So, let's take just one example. During this pandemic, small farmers and vendors continued to be able to sell their produce and make a living. They were not just dependent on government handouts and things like that. Why? Because cashless transactions had become prevalent already. Remember how demonetization was demonized all over the world by the experts? Before demonetization, people were using all soiled currency notes, massive infection risk. All transactions would have been stopped. People would have starved. The agricultural economy would have been destroyed. Hyperinflation. Instead, as Rajeev said last time, digital payments now exceed those of many advanced nations combined. How much planning and execution went into that capability? That's just one example. These steps have been so ignored and horribly misrepresented in the Western media and the Indian West parroting media.
Anjali, may I add another example here? Online platforms have sprouted for the sale and purchase of farm products. So a farmer who has a few metric tons of tomatoes, for example, to sell, puts it on these online platforms. A puree or a ketchup manufacturer is interested, they negotiate, and the deal is done within half an hour. I'm actually the mentor of one such platform, and we know how busy our platform has been. Even corporates have started making use of our platform, for it's a win-win. The farmer can demand and often gets a good price for his produce. At the same time, the buyers, the wholesalers, the processing companies can get their inventories of the quality of their choice and in time. Older generations may remember how farmers were compelled to make their distress sale, sometimes even dump their perishable produce on the roadside because there was no time to find buyers. In our new India, technology is helping to solve such problems.
Well, I must say that Narayanan ji, thank you so much. Nivedita ji, thanks to you as well for giving the explanation from your end. But this graphic, it provides such an excellent overview of the current trends in India's progress. So let's now talk about the subject we'll focus on today, which is human capital development. So, Rajeev ji, can you please broadly set the stage? What does this mean, and how do we measure it?
Thank you, Anjali. Thanks. Human capital formation obviously is a pretty broad thing, and the most obvious part of it is education. Now, the idea is, in a nutshell, how can we make our citizens lead better lives, become more productive, better equipped to be economic actors? And basically, it's the Indian version of the American dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And as has been discussed, one part of this is the provision of simple and basic infrastructural services, as Nivedita spoke about in our last segment, and both Narayan and Nivedita just discussed: electricity, roads and railroads, ports, healthcare, cooking gas, indoor toilets, crop insurance, microfinance and small business loans, and so on. The idea is really to enable people to move from, sort of low productivity subsistence activities, especially in agriculture, to higher value addition. And the state is literally the only player there because it's a long-term investment in the future, and private players probably would not be willing to do that. There's also another aspect to it, sort of a social justice angle. There are many who have been excluded from the wage earning economic activities. For example, women. And it's been proven that if a woman is able to earn a cash income, that has a massive impact on not only themselves, but their entire families. This is demonstrated to begin with by Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, but also by Kudumbashree in Kerala. So that's an important inclusion issue. How can you bring them into the economic mainstream? So the most important thing for all this in terms of what leads to human capital formation is obviously education. And it's got very tangible value. There is the famous BRICS paper from 2003 from Goldman Sachs, and it said that it could quantify the value of education. It said that one additional year of schooling for the average worker would provide 0.3% additional growth in GDP over the next 30 years. So that's huge in terms of impact. But there's actually a lot more, in addition to education. So, for example, we have some lacunae in our education system. One is that it tends to focus too much on, not on school education, but on tertiary education, college. And also there is, as we'll discuss, too much on theory and too little on hands-on how to do things, which is a very startling contrast with East Asia. Women continue to be not as many or in proportion to their numbers in the workforce. A third issue is, we have very talented diaspora people, and we should be able to attract them back to India and even attract foreigners who have certain skills. Like, for example, Taiwan did with their Hsinchu Science Park. And that was a major factor in attracting semiconductor fabrication plants to Taiwan, which has become a big strength for them. And recently the Chinese have done that too. So we have to encourage, diaspora people. So, like somebody like Narayan should be encouraged to come back to India. Then there is there are some other questions about, is English medium the right thing for us? I would say that it's become a handicap because it reduces the amount of comprehension that students have, and it also brings with it a lot of baggage. Then there is, basic nutrition, for example, midday meals, adequate health care, and provision of, simple things like provision of toilets so that post-puberty girls do not drop out. So this is infrastructure for good schooling. And then there is a new education policy, NEP 2020. So we don't know how well it's going to work out, but it's in its early stages now. Then, unfortunately, we still see this mad rush among our population for government jobs. And there was an unfortunate incident a couple of weeks ago where a bunch of people who had come for railway jobs set fire to railway property because there were delays and there was some confusion about it. So why do people still go for government jobs? What is the sort of the psychosis behind that? Why aren't people going in for private sector jobs? It's a good question. So human capital, how can we develop a human capital so that people will be, for example, entrepreneurial? And a big part of that is also the creation of intellectual property mechanisms, right? If you have the ability to support creativity and innovation and create patents and other IPR, that should lead to startups. And finally, one area or two areas, one that's been neglected a little bit is simple skill development. Instead of just sending everybody to college, shouldn't we be skilling them up with technical competence? For example, in mechanical engineering, tool and die makers, etc. And then finally, there's one other aspect where we seem to be failing, which is in sort of instilling a strong civic sense in the public. Okay, so all these are part of human capital development. Now, I don't know if there is a very clear way of measuring human capital, but it's an indirect measure. Is the country moving up the economic value chain, moving up from basic low-level goods and services onto increasingly sophisticated goods on a large scale? For example, and I never tire of talking about this, India was able to ramp up its vaccine production almost overnight. But that indicates that there is a very good level of human capital availability and infrastructure in that sector. Just to give a little bit more concreteness to some of these things, I got a slide from the Economic Survey 2022 and some other sources. And if I may request that slide be put up, that would be great. And the next slide, please. It shows, thank you. That shows the fact that in the last year or so, agriculture has done rather well, which is good, and industry has also picked up. but services, as one can imagine, have not been doing so well. But the fact that industry and agriculture have grown is because of infrastructure. Jal Jeevan for drinking water availability, ports, railways, etc. And these are long-term assets that can support all sorts of manufacturing as well as the quality of life. May I have the next slide, please? This slide is also from the Economic Survey 2022. This talks about, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it shows how nighttime electricity use has improved. These are satellite pictures. And as you can see, it's not only the cities, obviously there are clusters around Mumbai and Delhi and so forth, but even out in the hinterland. So for example, in Jharkhand and so forth, you see the number of lights have gone up. What this means is that economic activity is picking up. So this is a very positive infrastructural benefit. Next slide, please. Another is that of Jal Jeevan. If you look at it carefully, the bluer the sector is, the more water availability, on-tap water availability to households. And this is a brilliant picture because it shows how all of a sudden things have improved. And it's not the end, it's continuing to improve. So this is another example of infra that is helping human capital development. And specifically, we talked about this last time also. If women don't have to spend 2-3 hours a day going and fetching water, obviously they can be productive economically. May I have the next slide, please? This slide shows the national highway network, and you can see at a glance how it's become far denser, and that is an enabler as well, because people can not only migrate, you can also have goods movement very easily across the country. Next slide, please. This is about another aspect. Narayan talked about cell phones. India happens to have the lowest price in the world for cellular data. According to this, it's 0.26 US dollars, and America, it's 12 US dollars. Now, even by that GDP multiplier, this is a big difference. So India's is like 50 times less than the cost in America, which is great. And the fact of the matter is that people have jumped on internet usage. Next slide, please. And this is something that I was not expecting. Salesforce.com has done a survey of digital skills readiness around the world. I don't have the full report, but India has shown is surprisingly good in a number of these. So what this means is that we are seeing, at least in narrow areas, like we mentioned a minute ago, about cellular availability, but digital skills in many areas also improving. So human capital formation is happening on a fairly broad scale. Next slide, please. And this one, this is something that I found in the Financial Times, and it really surprised me because it talks about the ability of various countries to provide support with ICU and so forth for COVID patients. Now you look at it and you see, some of the rich countries are way up there, but you see India is doing much better than not only China, but also New Zealand and Japan. So this is another example of where we have managed to create human capital. So that's that in a nutshell. I wanted to show you how there has been a significant improvement in many areas of human capital already, but obviously this is a never-ending struggle and an ongoing issue. So let me stop here. And
Rajeev ji, I have to agree with you that there has indeed been a significant achievement. In fact, I was smiling when you were showing the Salesforce slide. The reason is that in the place where I work, all the Salesforce experts are from India. So, so indeed, a lot has been achieved, but India's education system is not exactly a bright spot, except in patches. So it is not broad. It doesn't do justice to Indian history, and there is an undercurrent of political correctness, right? So there are also arguments about whether to teach everything in local languages rather than English. So, do you see any positives? After all, the education system is a crucial force multiplier, as we have seen in the case of East Asia. And well, before you any one of you answers this, let me tell you, this slide presentation was really wonderful, very educative, eye-opening, and I would request our viewers, whoever will be watching this program, to please go back and take a look at these slides, which actually give you the real facts as to how India has progressed so far. So thank you for doing all this hard work and labor, putting all these slides together. So now back to my questions, and I mean my answer to my question.
So let me take that. The average age of Indians is 28, actually 28.4. They were a couple of months older, I guess. Some 700 million are entering the workforce. That number is from the Consul General of India in Atlanta few years ago. In the next few years, and they have a career window of another 30 to 60 years. It's a huge opportunity and danger. We can't have all these people sitting in government offices or banks creating KYC forms and for the rest of us to fill. But seriously, advanced but aging nations are automating everything to get rid of human employees. So betting on foreign job markets is not a good idea. Unlike the 1970s, government jobs, defined benefit pensions, savings bank interest, these are no longer viable for a productive and secure life. So how are all these people going to earn a living? So yes, the education system needs reform, but I do want to make a point. And the point is, let's not destroy our traditional competitive advantages. We are all products of the Indian education system here. Rajeev and I did go through the IITs, true, but we came from the state government SSLC pre-degree track, the most common. And as I recall, that is a free system. We didn't have to pay any fees for it. But yet, we landed up in the USA clutching BTech degrees from a so-called third world nation at age 22. And we were what are called pigs, PIGS. That's not any insult. It's a badge of honor. It means poor Indian graduate students. Yet on day one, we knew what to do. We didn't have to take remedial classes. We had, minimal orientation classes, just to tell you, where things are and things like that. And that's it. And then we went straight into the best graduate schools in the world. We knew how to learn to do our jobs at the leading edge of research. Yes, I was terrified. And the big shock to me was, hey, these people are not pretending. They're actually going to trust me to do what? But we had the work ethic and our basic knowledge was solid. And that is true of the vast majority of Indian students going anywhere in the world. Nothing special about us. Why is that so? It's a rule, not the exception. The products of the Indian education system do quite well anywhere in the world. And I attended a 40-year reunion at the local Thrissur Engineering College in Kerala. My wife's undergraduate class in chemical engineering. It's not an NIT or an IIT, just a good government engineering college. The students there entered on merit, they graduated on merit, they got jobs on merit, they led respected, productive, rewarding careers and raised their families around the world and in India. And in India, yeah. Their teachers are very proud of them. What more can one ask?
Narayan, I'm sorry, but I do wish to provide a little bit of a dissenting opinion. I agree with you about the quality of the Indian students in terms of their preparedness and in terms of their knowledge, etc. But I also have some concern about what I see as the work ethic of Indian students today. Maybe, it's changed over the last, 40 years since our time. But my view comes from teaching in the IIMs for 15 years and from hiring hundreds of engineering graduates. I have some, unfortunately, negative views about their motivation and their diligence, although they're individually smart. The problem is that they lack discipline and they have a sort of a culture that implies that they should game the system by doing as little work as possible and get away with it. Okay, so This is a problem I've seen, which I think is an issue, because if you are going into head-to-head competition with the East Asians, right? Now those guys, whether they are smart or not, they work like mad and nonstop. And you must have seen this in your graduate students as well. So if you have our students who believe that they can pull an all-nighter and at the last minute, they can work miracles, well, that works for a while, but that's not a long-term sustainable mechanism. So that's something I have some concerns about. And then the other problem I see with Indian students is that there is a lot of idiotic campus politics. In my opinion, politics should be just banned in colleges. No politics, no political parties. But today what happens is that, politicians are using these poor youth as cannon fodder, and it ruins their lives, and then they end up being, not very useful in the workforce as well. In fact, the other issue is that of not enough hands-on skills being learned. I believe the Germans, they stream at age 15 half of their students into trades and industrial training for machine tools, plumbing, electrical vehicle maintenance, carpentry, whatever, right? So skills development is very important for the nation. And one thing I've noticed is that there is an absolute, crying need for tool, jig, and die makers. And these are master, technicians, and they are absolutely necessary to make the molds and things like that for any products. If you want to build products, you need a tool and jig maker, and we just don't have enough of them. And that's one of the big advantages the Chinese have, and that's how they're able to sort of reverse engineer any product within, a few months. Now, the other thing is that the sort of I don't know, the Germans honor their craftspeople as meisters, as masters, and the Japanese have a habit of honoring some of their top craftsmen as national treasures, and that means that their traditional knowledge is preserved as well. So today, everybody wants to go to college, learn something, and get a cushy government job. You talked about Kerala, which I'm and Narayan are from. So the Kerala government is amazing. Their budget today is 70% for salaries and pensions. So there's actually nothing left over for actually investing anything on the ground. So that's a big problem.
I agree. And Anjali, you know what? It's the fact is that when we attained independence, the country had no education system, whether primary or secondary, whether urban or rural. We literally started from scratch. So apart from the public schools and convent schools set up by the missionaries, we only had a handful of Indian schools run by the trusts in the pockets of our country. So we had the Arya Samajis running the DAV schools and colleges, the Srinivasan Trust School, Chettiars, the Ramakrishna Mission Trust, but they were minuscule in number as compared to the demand, and hardly any in rural areas. So as schools were set up post-independence in our villages and towns, they had to follow an example, and they had no role model to follow. So knowingly or unknowingly, they followed the one available and the closest to them. And this was the one they were most familiar with, which was the one left behind by the colonizers. So the choice of subjects, the syllabus, the whether it was from a local or a national perspective, whether the course was in the Indian languages or in English, everything was determined by the model that they followed, which was left behind. So post-independence, we really made that mistake. We need not have waited for so long to find our roots. We should have found our roots immediately after that. And alas, as more and more government and private-run schools came up, they were more or less mirror images of the earlier ones.
So, what would you say is the main shortcoming in our primary education system?
If you ask me, I think the main shortcoming has been the absence of a clear model with emphasis on helping to develop the child's innate qualities, encouraging his or her creativity and innovative thinking. These are lacking in our education system, especially our primary and elementary schools. So, a robust education system, I believe, requires inter alia practicing and learning to think in the local languages, which a child is most comfortable with, a feel for numbers, exposure to local crafts and fine arts, and very important, Indian history that goes back beyond the Mughal period. I don't think I learned any history beyond that. It is only of late that children are getting a chance to get a taste of Vedic maths, of Buddhist logic, of Charvak rationalism. You see, these were unknown to our children. We should expose our children to these gems we have from our past. So, in the 50s and 60s, as we set up our very prestigious centers of higher learning, the IITs and IIM, which both my co panelists are from, we should also have looked at the other end of the spectrum and given our primary education a method and direction. And as Rajeev reminded us, our education system should have had a strong and willful, not apologetic, a willful input on civic sense and patriotism, which is quite ironical as the sacrifices of Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, Ahilyabai, even Netaji, and many others, other freedom fighters, were still so fresh in our nation's collective psyche in the 50s and 60s. And then, as the students cross into elementary school and later into high school, the system should have a heavy input of vocational training, a hands on vocational training, learning to work with their hands and to conceptualize their thinking, to understand things in a holistic manner. But our education system continued to aim towards creating clerical material rather than creative and innovative builders of a new India and patriotic citizens.
I couldn't agree with you more, Nivedita. We create pen pushers and not people who can take risks, get their hands dirty, build things like companies, platforms, ecosystems. And that's exactly what we need going forward. We need people to be building companies that will eventually rival, the big American technology companies or the Chinese companies, etc. We just have not created that sort of go-getter, get my hands dirty, get physically out there, and that is a tragedy in my opinion.
So it looks like, there is still this colonial mindset. So why do you think that there is this infatuation for English in India?
I'm glad you asked that, Anjali. I'm a product of it. I'm a convent school educated girl. But you see, when the India's occupiers, they very consciously helped create a set of higher classes who were left behind to rule India. They molded themselves in the colonizer's image. These people who were left behind, these classes, these families, they molded themselves in the colonizer's image. There was no other image that they aspired for. But the social reforms, including the reforms in education, even in our day-to-day practices, even our religious reforms for that matter, they all came from within, from amongst us. Whether it was Sri Narayana Guru, whether it was Subramaniam Bharati, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Guru Ravidas, they were all from within the country. The middle class is the largest in size. It was so busy trying to bring themselves up. They had to, they were the nouveau riche. The term English medium, convent educated, public school educated, they became the catchphrases. Now, nowadays, if you forcibly deprive the kids from accessing English medium schools, it seems so unreasonable and unfair, isn't it? It's almost as if these kids are being deprived from going to English medium schools because they are economically poorer. That doesn't seem to be fair. It has to come from them. They have to realize that if they go in for other types of education, they can also succeed. Unfortunately, the high-end schools have also supplied most of the persons who get in through our competitive exams, who get the best jobs, the highly paid jobs. They exude confidence and suave and are very stylish. And who doesn't want their children to be that? So the parents see this as the aspirational ticket to upward mobility. Slowly, very slowly, we are beginning to take pride in our own languages, learning to understand our history and heritage, not from a colonial prism, but as our own. So we, I have to give another example here. Our team works here in the suburbs of Delhi, and we work with the migrant workers to send their children to good schools. And we do something a bit underhand, but interesting, and it works. What we do is we often add the name English medium to the government schools, and we do it on our own. And that really works. The parents start asking, "Ye bhi English medium school hai, madam?" And we say, "Yes, it is. They teach English there." And then they start agreeing to send their kids to these government schools. So you see, the appellation, public, and convent, these have been our shortcoming. And I'm glad that the new education policy recommends that only the government and government funded schools henceforth can carry the appellation public to their names.
Again, I agree with you that, Nivedita, that we've sort of been fooled into thinking that English gives us a global advantage. It really doesn't. Or even if it does, it's very temporary, because we know lots of people jumped onto things like medical transcription or call center jobs, which require English proficiency. But those jobs vanished overnight. Today, we have a lot of IT services jobs, but they will also be in some kind of jeopardy when no-code systems like GPT-3 start producing computer code from general descriptions in natural language. So, the English advantage is actually turning into an English albatross around our necks, in my opinion.
Narayanan ji, so we have been talking so much about the English education. You've studied in both countries. Do you have anything to add to it?
Yeah, so students from Japan and Korea and China and France and Germany and Brazil, now that's spread out around the world, is it not? They learn everything in their own language. And these are all different languages. I have peeked at their laptop computers and realized that I was illiterate. Nothing in English, nothing in Malayalam, of course. The first need and opportunity, therefore, is to develop resources to learn technology and everything else in one's own language. Lack of such resources will kill Indian languages and culture. Today, even when translation is done, it's just writing English words in Indian script, and that's not good enough. That's not just India, mind you. I've seen urban Pakistanis have exactly the same habits. They talk in Urdulish, like our people talk in Hindulish or Manglish. For instance, I tried to get a simple solar photovoltaic primer, a few PowerPoint slides translated into Malayalam. They didn't even change the word sun to Suryan. Only the verbs were changed. That's a start, but it's not enough to take ownership of technology. Kids must think technology in their own languages. So let me go on. There's the old Malayalam joke about the servant who only knew yes, no, and very good. And what a disaster that was. And many people today remind me of that. And then there is the joke about the Indian mantri who's supposed to have said after touring the West on a fact-finding mission, the West is advanced because वहाँ छोटे-छोटे बच्चे भी अच्छी तरह अंग्रेजी में बातचीत करते हैं. Even little children converse very well in English. The mantri had a point. What struck him was that people were learning and owning technology in their own language. That's exactly right. And that does make a huge difference. But before we go on to that, I want to mention one thing here. The PhD qualifying exam in aerospace engineering. That's not a usual life experience, I know. I have fortunately had to go through that only once in my life. Thank you very much. Never again. But I've been on the other side, one of the examiners, the monsters, hundreds of times. As a researcher, one must not make sweeping generalizations, but I'm going to make one with absolute certainty. The Indian students were on par with, and usually far better than, the best candidates educated in the best US institutions. I was privileged to be in a place where I could say with confidence that I was seeing the best. Those are provable statements, no exaggeration. This is not about GPA. Everyone in that exam had stellar GPAs, and 50% used to fail. Many 4.0 GPAs were disasters. It was no, so this was about fundamental knowledge, physical insight, lateral thinking, transferring and integrating concepts across, formulating solutions on the fly, doing order of magnitude estimates on your feet, under pressure, no calculator, no smartphone. And not done by rote memorization alone. You didn't even remember your name after a few minutes of that. I was so panicked.
So, don't you think, Narayanji, that Indian students, you would agree that they do have an advantage over others, right? Because
Well, that's not English. We were very, very careful because we were examining students from all over the world. And this is what I'm saying is that Indian students there did much better than the American students educated in American institutions through the undergraduate, who had no problem with English. So it is not about language. And of course, there were students from other countries who did extremely well. What I'm saying is that Indian students can really learn to do all these things very well, provided they have the right motivation and all that. So yeah, that's we have recognized that we did have the system does have something very good about it. But in education, at the end, what matters is not what you teach; it's what is learned. It's what people observe and what they can use when it's needed, and that takes effort, discipline, and all these things. So that's what I have to say on that.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with Professor Narayanan. What is important is what the kid imbibes. And Indian kids are very smart and, and they imbibe very well. But there has been this inbuilt conviction among the parents that English medium education is essential for getting a good job. And perhaps they are right. It is so. So they need to be explained and they need to personally realize that this is not so correct any longer. They have to, they have to feel it themselves. You can't compel them to stop sending their kids to these so-called quote unquote English medium schools. So even now I face situations where parents who themselves are barely literate, they refuse to send their kids to government schools, which is free, where there is a free meal a day. There is so much available there. And they spend almost sometimes 1/3 of their entire income on sending a child to a private school. But only because, madam, wahan pe government schools mein Angrezi nahi padhate. So that's the tragedy.
Yeah, I continue to believe that the value of an English education is sort of debatable and it's exaggerated in India. I think its time has come and gone. Exactly as you both said, Narayan and Nivedita. The issue is, what is actually learned there. Today, my belief is that you have teachers who don't know English very well, who are teaching physics, mathematics, history, whatever, in English to students who don't know English very well themselves, which means there is a massive loss in transmission, probably like 30-40% right there. I don't see any reason to do English medium education, but absolutely learn English as a subject. And that's exactly what the Germans and the Japanese do, and the Chinese. And all of them are much better, doing much better in the R&D game than we are. So, as I said before, I think, English has become not a boon, but an albatross around our necks. Now, having said that, I have to acknowledge that there are some visionaries. There's a fellow named Balaji Srinivasan. I don't know him personally, but he's a celebrated venture capitalist and crypto enthusiast from Silicon Valley. He moved from Silicon Valley to Singapore in India, and he thinks Indians who are proficient in English can take on all sorts of global technology and management roles. And he, interestingly enough, thinks that Indians will even dominate global media. Now, I respect Balaji, who's been, right very often, but I don't think he's correct here. I think he's actually wrong here, and there is a very strong case for us to study in English. Sorry, not in English. And I'm gratified to see that just recently, some universities started offering their courses in Marathi, and it was fully taken up. They offered only about 60, 70 seats, but they were all picked up right away by students. So I think there is beginning to be a bit of a pendulum swing the other way.
so, you know, all of you gave a lot of examples of men who have been successful, and the last one was, of course, the example of Balaji. But I have this question, and I think I should direct it to, okay, maybe Nivedita ji or any one of you wants to pick up. What role do girls or women have to play in this? After all, they form half the population.
Yeah, I was just waiting for you to ask me that, Anjali. Girls' education, very, very important. And the high dropout rates because of lack of infrastructure, that is worrisome. I can give you hundreds of examples where by providing decent classrooms, toilets, water taps, and an attached Anganwadi for the toddlers so that the kid who comes to school can bring his younger brother or sister and keep them in the Anganwadi. The dropout rate of girl students has dropped perceptibly. It's really mind-boggling how it works. That is one of my primary visions these days, improve the quality of our government schools in and around my location. We have recently added a computer lab to our list of indispensables. If I may refer back to the tables my co-panelists showed, good infrastructure by way of roads and transport are so essential for our youth, especially the women, to continue their education. I have a glaring example and a very potent example that comes to my mind. Aratupura, a panchayat in Alapura district in Kerala, is a thin strip of land. It is sandwiched between the Kayamkulam Lake on one side and the Arabian Sea on the other. When the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004 hit us, it almost destroyed the infrastructure in the panchayat and it took many, many lives there in Aratupura. So, as part of the reconstruction program, a bridge was constructed to enable the Aratupura residents to escape to the mainland in case of a disaster in future. Do you know what I realized when I went back there after almost 5 years? The daughters from the panchayat have gone into teaching and nursing professions in very large numbers. And they are all children of fishermen and fish vendors. The bridge has actually provided them the entry, the access to higher education and training, which they earlier did not have.
That's a remarkable story, Nivedita ji, and I'm actually somewhat familiar with that area in Kerala. But I wanted to re-emphasize the importance of infrastructure for girl students. It's the very small thing for us urban dwellers, but it's a very big deal for rural girl students. Decent toilets, especially once they attain puberty. Many girls drop out of school because the toilets are either non-existent or they're so disgusting that they cannot bear to go there for their feminine hygiene needs. And this is tragic. But on the positive side, I've noticed that the number of girl students who are going into university professional courses has gone up a lot. Like, if I'm not mistaken, in Kerala, there are more girl students going into medical courses. So it's becoming doctors are becoming more feminized, and even engineering colleges, you may have maybe 30-40% of the students are women. So I think there is a professional class that is developing, which is a good thing among women.
So yeah, these are great examples. But I have something else, which is coming to my mind now, because I too have studied in India and I have studied here as well. But I can say that a substantial portion of what we learned in our textbook, now this applies both to India and here, it was not applicable to our jobs. What do you think of that?
So let me take that. The math science curricula that I've seen in my nephews and nieces' textbooks, K through 12 textbooks, those are excellent. I'm glad I didn't have to take those questions there. They were not easy by any means, and I think the teachers were teaching quite well. But what matters is what is learned. I don't really know the K through 12 realities, except that I see so many children carrying bags bigger than themselves to tuition classes after hours and on weekends. So poor things, they're really trying to study, or their parents are really trying to get them to study. But I don't know why they have to do that. I'm so happy that my parents allowed me to grow up free. I mean, from 3:30 to 6 p.m. was sacred as my playtime. For higher education, though, See, people change careers many times. So training is needed, but good formal education actually serves well even there. I will defend rote memorization, which everybody attacks, because it gets you off to a great start from zero. But then you have to start using your knowledge to build confidence and experience in your own language. See, I still do arithmetic in my head using what my mother taught me in Malayalam as a child.
That's interesting, Narayan. I do the same thing. I count in Malayalam. Okay, even though I studied in English medium my entire life, and it's true that there are scientific studies that show that memorization can enlarge certain portions of a child's brain. But I have a little bit of a concern, which is that we seem to bombard students with stuff that probably goes in one ear and goes out the other. Okay, like when you and I studied at IIT Madras, we did 10 semesters of calculus. Our program is 5 years long, and I've never used it in my life ever again, even though I was a technical employee for many years. But I have to say, in contrast, what I studied at Stanford Business School, a great deal of that, of course not 100%, but maybe 60-70% I did use in my working career. So maybe the content also needs to change to become more real world oriented. And there was some studies from I think McKinsey, the consultancy, that said that only 20% of Indian engineering graduates are employable. The rest need to go for quote unquote remedial training. So in that case, why make them go through an engineering education in the first place? Just hire high school graduates and give them the remedial training. Okay.
I do want to speak to that a little bit. Yes, that those math courses were horrible, but every day I pay the price for not being a better student in those classes. So it changes it's different between different disciplines. And I think the curricula have to be sensitive to that and think a little bit harder on what each specialization stream should teach and etc. etc. India's traditional competitive advantage is in math and science. I had to remind you of that. The problem is that people don't learn what they're supposed to. Maybe it's because they don't see how it relates at all. But I don't think the curriculum should be watered down. And on the other hand, I think only those who are really ready should survive in college. That sounds very elitist, but maybe it's not. I think it's also practical. See, I'll give you a story. In the late 80s, early 90s, Boeing, so this is aerospace, right? Boeing, General Electric, and other companies came out and declared that the product of US engineering schools is not suited to their workforce needs. Okay, so it's not just an Indian problem. This is around the world. Flat, in-your-face statement to academia, saying, what you're doing is you're not doing your jobs. So they brought their ideas into the accreditation system because their unions would not allow them to recruit from non-accredited schools. Some universities were far ahead of the workplace. Others catered to immediate industry demands, which is not really a good thing. It's a disservice. And others lagged far behind, and many from all the above are now, I believe, accelerating backwards. Boeing walked the talk. They set up what was called the Welliver Faculty Fellows Program. And for about 15 years, they brought 10 faculty members each year to spend 8 weeks living at Boeing. Total immersion, very intense, to teach us what Boeing really wanted. And yes, their HR people kept blabbering about at that time about a broad education, system engineering, without a clue as to what that requires. And that's why I say don't go just imitating the propaganda on what the West is doing. What I got there was something totally different. I got a real wake-up call, which was, I liked it. Maybe it was a confirmation bias, but they told me that, look, at the very top of Boeing, so not everybody needs to be trained to be at the very top of Boeing, I know. But the message that was being hammered into me is that thinking mathematically is a huge advantage in engineering design. Okay, so at the top of national competitiveness, you really need that. When you're out in the unknown, math is the only truth that you can trust. Think about that. I wish I had that skill. If I try to teach that in today's mandatory classes, I get killed. No doubt about it. People don't like it. And here I want you to listen. The Chinese and the Japanese and the Russians and the French laugh at us. I mean Americans. Okay, because they do this and they do have a very strong advantage there. Look at all the excellent engineering software that comes from France. Do you see any from Infosys? They made a total Pakistan, as I call it, out of the straightforward job of programming that income tax forms. How tough is that? Okay. But should everyone go to the IITs or the École Supérieure or University of Tokyo? No, you're absolutely right on that. Now, many Indian engineering schools now imitate that same ABET accreditation. And I'll say the following about it. That accreditation is now based on what is called the people's self-assessment. I'm going to leave you to ponder that term self-assessment in the hands of the people you see running engineering colleges. Okay, perhaps a similar discussion needs to start in India. I have not seen a coherent message there yet.
So just this last question I have, since I think we are very close to our time for closing this program. My question is, do you think that India's demographic dividend gives the country an edge, or is it more of a liability?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that. The fact is that 70% of India's population is below 30 years, which is definitely a big asset. This population profile will continue more or less for the next 40 years. India needs to exploit this advantage to the hilt. We need to get ahead in digital coverage, come up with new startups in every sector. Our kids need to excel in sports. And in short, we need to be the repository of human resource that can take the country forward for the entire globe. Skilled youth is what any developing country aspires for. However, if this huge youth population is left without gainful employment, it can be a potent source of unrest and catastrophe. We cannot afford to let that happen. And that is why a robust education system with sharply honed skills is the need of the hour. And I'm happy that the new education policy refers to it, but unfortunately, it doesn't go far enough. Anjali?
So no, thank you so much for your response. Actually, it's just that I was so spellbound for a moment that I was just wondering, that all the responses that the three of you have given, and what you have showcased about India to our viewers is really remarkable. I want to really thank you all once again for providing this insight into the growth of India's educational system. Thank you so much for being a part of this India Rising adventure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. A pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So I have to say to my viewers that education has always been at the core of the Indian values since time immemorial. So for this very reason, most Indian students, they continue to shine and perform extremely well in any challenging academic environment anywhere in the globe. So these are the pillars on which are laid the foundation of a flourishing civilization. We wish India all the very best in this endeavor. Thank you so much for joining us today.